Part 2. This is a continuation of the story. The link to the first part is in the description of this video. Enjoy watching. The next day, Jen tried not to dwell on thoughts of her husband alone with two beautiful women and had almost pushed it from her mind until the phone rang. "Hello, honey," greeted Marge. "So, did you hear about the boys' big weekend golf trip? You must be awful proud of your man. He's doing something right. I wish he'd let Jack in on his secret." "Oh, yeah," Jen replied. "I heard all about it." Marge thought for a second before continuing. "What do you mean, I should be proud of him? What secret? Didn't he tell you? This whole golf trip thing is like a second bonus. Ken has already surpassed his quarterly quota. Jack says he's their top salesman for corporate accounts." "No, he didn't mention that. All he said was Jack, and Tara were going to meet her sister for a 3-day weekend to play golf. After that, we kind of got into it. I expressed some concerns, and he got pissed. He brought up that stupid weekend again. I thought he was over that, but evidently not." "What do you mean, you got into it? What concerns? What are you talking about?" "Marge, your husband and my husband are going to spend a long weekend in a luxury hotel with two beautiful women. Doesn't that concern you?" "Well, when you put it like that," Marge said with a chuckle in her voice, "no, I'm not concerned at all. I swear, Jen, you've been paranoid ever since you went on that crazy trip. First Ken thinks you were cheating, and now you think he's cheating. What the hell is going on with you two?" "I don't know, Marge. You're right, I am paranoid. I can't help it. I'm worried sick. I think Ken still has his doubts about me sleeping with another man on that trip, and I'm afraid he might do something stupid out of revenge. Please, listen to yourself, Jen. Stop. Ken's not like that. He's not about to do anything stupid with anyone. You know better than that. He didn't plan this. It was given to him. It was his idea to call Tara, then Smitty said he couldn't go. That's when Tara asked if her sister could join them. It's not like Ken had any of this prearranged. The whole thing was put together on the spur of the moment. You should be proud of him, not accusing him." Jen sat quietly, pondering her friend's words. She knew she was being irrational, but she couldn't ignore the bad feeling in her gut. "Listen, Jen," Marge continued, "why don't we go out to a movie Saturday night? It'll take your mind off things for a while." "Thanks, Marge. That's a great idea. Call me in the afternoon, and we'll figure out what to see." As they said their goodbyes, Jen was determined to stop her foolishness, take her friend's advice, and treat her man with the love and respect he deserved. When Ken walked in that night, Jen had a candlelight dinner waiting for him. A good bottle of wine, a delicious meal, and a loving wife can do wonders for a man's disposition. After she cleared the table, Ken tried to help with the dishes, but she refused. "You go relax," she told him. "I'll be out in a few minutes." Ken almost felt guilty sitting in the den, searching for something to watch on TV, while his wife was clanging dishes in the kitchen. True to her word, she was soon done and cuddled up alongside him. He put his arm around her and pulled her tighter into his side. Almost unnoticeable, Jen reached over and started to unbutton his shirt. She had the first 3 undone before he even realized what was going on. "What are you doing?" he asked, feigning ignorance. "Well, I'm not going to see you all weekend," she responded in her sexiest voice. "I'm going to need a little something to hold me over." "A little something? Is that a dig?" he joked. "Ken," she said, faking anger and punching him lightly in the arm, "you know better than that." "Well, my little something is getting bigger just thinking about it," she said with a playful grin. "Oh, you're not kidding," she added. "What do you say we go upstairs and put your big something to good use?" Jen suggested with a playful smile. Ken turned off the TV remote, took her hand, and led the way upstairs. The next morning, Jen got up extra early and had toast and fresh coffee ready as Ken prepared for his trip. "All packed?" she asked, escorting him to the door. "Yep, I've got everything I need. I'll be back late Sunday night. Our plane gets into O'Hare around 8:30. By the time I get my bags and get out of there, it'll probably be almost 10 by the time I get home. Forcing a smile, Jen told him, "You have a good time." She helped him with the buttons on his coat. "I will," he said with a smile, but Jen couldn't leave well enough alone, and her anxiety resurfaced. "Just don't have too good of a time." "You be good, Buster. Remember who you're coming home to," she said almost as if warning him. As soon as she said it, she wished she hadn't. The smile quickly faded from Ken's face. She could see the anger and disappointment in his eyes. His goodbye kiss was brief and lacked passion. He walked out the door without saying another word, and she watched nervously as he loaded his luggage and clubs into the back of his car. Jen saw daylight breaking over the horizon as he drove off toward the airport. At the departure gate, Ken heard a familiar female voice. "Hey there!" Tara called out, already sitting next to Jack. She jumped up and gave him a friendly kiss on the cheek. "I'm so excited. I've never been to Hilton Head before." "Have you?" "Never," Ken replied. "I was there once," Jack volunteered, "but that was many years ago." The three of them chatted until they were called to board. Since the plane was only half full, they were able to sit together. Tara snagged the window seat. About midway through the flight, Tara remembered something she wanted to ask. "Hey guys, I can get a good deal on a new cell phone." Jack and Ken looked at each other and laughed. Ken looked back at Tara. "You're kidding, right? You do know we both work in telecommunications, right? What's wrong with the phone you've got?" Ken asked. "The disconnect button keeps sticking on me. The other day, I tried calling a girlfriend of mine. When her phone went to voicemail, I tried to hang up, but the button wouldn't work. I kept hitting it, but it wouldn't disconnect. The voicemail just kept going. I finally stuck the thing back in my purse. I have no idea how long it stayed connected. It's happened 3 or 4 more times since then. Don't worry. When we get back to Chicago, we'll set you up with a new phone at a fraction of what it would cost you in a store," Ken assured her. Tara smiled. "Thanks, guys. I knew I could count on you." The rest of the flight was filled with small talk, mostly about golf. When they landed, Ken got the rental car that was reserved by his employer, picked Tara and Jack up at arrivals, and headed toward their hotel. The weather was a pleasant 68 degrees, a welcome change from the 30s they left behind in Chicago. They checked into one room for Jack and Ken and another for Tara and her sister, Laura. They had about 2 hours before Ken and Tara needed to go back to the airport to pick up Laura, so they met in the restaurant for breakfast. "When is our first tee off?" Tara asked. 11:30, Ken replied. "I hope Laura's plane isn't late. It's going to be tight as it is." They called when they got back to the room and were happy to hear Laura's flight was on time. As soon as Ken saw Laura walking in from the gate, he knew she was Tara's sister. The two sisters screamed in excitement when they saw each other. Tara held out her arms as Laura approached. Laura dropped her overnight bag and embraced Tara, their display of sisterly love drawing smiles from several onlookers. After finally breaking their hug, Tara turned to Ken. "Laura, this is Ken, the guy I was telling you about." "Ken, this is my sister, Laura." "I'm not sure what she told you," Ken said with an easy smile and an outstretched hand, "but don't believe a word of it." "Oh, so you're not Tiger Woods, Arnold Palmer, and Jack Nicklaus all rolled into one?" Laura teased. "Not hardly," Ken chuckled. "Well, it's good to meet you anyway. This is the only luggage I have, but we'll need to go to baggage claim to get my clubs," Laura said. As she pointed out her golf bags sliding down the carousel, Ken grabbed them and hoisted her clubs over his shoulder. They were off for 3 days of golfing on lush green fairways. "I told you he was good," Tara said to her sister as they all sat down to order a beer and tally the scores. "Yeah, you weren't kidding." "What did you shoot, Ken?" Laura asked. "An 84, he said modestly. "You didn't do too bad yourself." "You shot a 93, not bad at all." "Tara and Jack tied with a 91, Ken said." "You shoot a lot like your sister," Ken remarked. "That figures," Tara interjected. "We both learned from the same guy." "I thought you learned from your ex," Jack inquired. "I did." "We both did," Tara responded. Now wait a minute, Jack said. I know Tony's a pretty good teacher, but he's not worth flying from Atlanta to Chicago for a lesson. The two ladies chuckled. No, I lived in Chicago my whole life, Laura said. Until last year, we lived only a few blocks from each other. The next best thing to having a professional golfer as a husband is having him as a brother-in-law. Free lessons. She stopped mid-sentence, realizing they were discussing her sister's ex-husband. She remembered the pain Tara had endured during the divorce. Oh, I'm sorry, she said, reaching over to take her sister's hand. I didn't mean. It's okay, Tara interrupted. I've learned to live without him. She looked at Jack and Ken. Since the divorce, I pretty much forbid anyone from talking about him when I was around. You see, as our relationship slowly fell apart, he had a new one springing up. I got sick one day at work and went home early. I walked right in on them. What a shock. What did you do? Jack asked. I divorced him, silly. Well, yeah, Jack said, but I mean, he saw Ken was about to put his foot in his mouth and headed him off. Damn, that had to be rough, Ken said sympathetically. Tara shrugged. It was. I was infatuated when I first met him. He was exciting and so full of energy. He was going to join the tour and compete with the greats. Unfortunately, after 3 tries, he couldn't get past Q school. It really took it out of him. When he finally accepted the teaching position, he seemed to lose interest in everything, including me. I'm sorry, Ken said again. Me too, echoed Jack. Well, it was a long time ago, Tara said, clearly wanting to move on. Ken directed the conversation back to Laura. So, what made you move to Atlanta? I work for Guys and Dolls clothing chain. I was a store manager for our downtown Chicago store, but last year I got an offer to work as a regional manager. The only hitch was that I'd be headquartered in Atlanta. What about your husband? Jack asked. Did he just pack up and quit his job? My husband works as a time management consultant. He goes around to large corporations and shows them how to improve their bottom line by streamlining things. He works from home when he's there, but he travels a lot, so it doesn't matter much where we live, Laura explained. Tara tells us you have kids, Jack interjected. Ah, yes, Laura said, reaching for her purse. They are the light of my life. She pulled out her wallet and flipped to the section holding some photos. With visible pride, she presented her children, one by one. You have a beautiful family, Jack said, reaching for his own wallet. Here's my brood, he joked. Tara was next, and both ladies looked at Ken. Jack, knowing the story, tried to steer the conversation away from painful memories, but Laura didn't catch on. What about you, Ken? Kids? Jack asked. Ken thought about just shaking his head and moving on, but, like Tara's divorce, it was a long time ago, and it no longer hurt as badly. No. My wife, Jennifer, got pregnant just after our second anniversary, but she miscarried after 7 months. She went into a deep depression for about a year afterward. We both went to grief counseling and eventually learned to live with it, but Jen won't try again. She's been on birth control ever since. Both women were stunned. Oh, Ken, I'm so sorry, they said almost in unison. Thanks, he replied. You never really get over something like that, you just learn to live with it. Suddenly, his voice perked up as he reached for his wallet. I do have a picture of my wife, though. Oh, she's beautiful, Tara commented as she took the picture for a closer look. Can I see? Laura asked. Tara passed the picture on, and only she noticed the subtle change in her sister's expression. Ever since they were kids, Laura's mouth would draw tight when she was under stress, a very subtle sign, but one Tara could always spot. Yes, Laura said quickly, handing the photo back to Ken. She's very pretty. The next morning, they all met for breakfast before their morning tea off. They had one round scheduled for 7:20 and another for 2:12 in the afternoon. The following day was Sunday. They had one round in the late morning and then had to check out and catch their plane back to snowy Chicago, except for Laura, who would be returning to her husband and kids in Atlanta. Since Friday afternoon, while talking about their families, Tara had noticed her sister's reserved mood. She asked her about it that night, but Laura insisted she was just tired from the trip and the round of golf so soon after arriving. Tara accepted the explanation at the time, but after a full night's sleep, Laura was still acting strangely. Tara was determined to get to the bottom of her sister's puzzling behavior, but she knew she wouldn't get a chance to talk to her again until later in the evening. They had a full day ahead of them. Ken and his crew were gearing up for their second round of golf for the day. Back in Chicago, Jin's phone was ringing. She wiped her eyes with a tissue and tried to sound normal as she answered. "Hello?" "Hey, girlfriend," greeted a cheery Marge. "So, did you figure out what movie you want to see tonight?" "Oh, Marge, I'm sorry, I haven't even looked." It was soon clear that Jin's attempt to disguise her anguish was in vain. "Jin, are you crying?" I can't help it. Ken and he hasn't even called to tell me he got there safely," she sobbed. "I think I'm losing him, Marge." "Oh God, what have I done?" "Losing him? Jin, what the hell? What do you mean, what have you done? What's happened?" "I've done something awful," she cried. "Jin, put on a pot of coffee and try to pull yourself together. I'll be over in 20 minutes, and you can tell me what this is all about, okay?" She sniffled before hanging up. Meanwhile, Tara and Laura were on the balcony of their hotel room. After an action-packed day with 36 holes of golf and dinner with Jack and Ken, they were ready to unwind with a glass of wine and catch up on some sibling gossip. But what was even more important to Tara was figuring out why Laura had been acting strange whenever Ken was around. "Okay, sis, spill it. What's going on? I saw the way you looked at the picture of Ken's wife yesterday, and you've been acting bizarre all day today, especially when Ken is around. Do you know his wife or something? If I tell you, you have to promise you'll never breathe a word of what I say to another living soul. I mean it, Tara. You can't say anything to anyone, ever. Promise?" "Yes, of course I promise." Laura looked down and stared into her glass of wine. Just as she started to speak, the phone rang. "Hold that thought," Tara said, putting her cell to her ear. "Hello?" "Hi Tara, it's Ken." As soon as Tara knew who was on the other end, she turned on the speaker and set the phone down on the little table between her and her sister. "Hey, Ken. What's up?" "Hi, Ken," interjected Laura with a slight hesitation in her voice. "Ladies," Ken said, addressing them both, "I was going over our schedule for tomorrow, and we'll have some free time before we have to leave. I was wondering if you ladies would like to have one last dinner before we all go home. I've been hearing about this little bistro that's not far from here, and I thought we could stop there on the way to the airport. What do you say? From what I hear, the place is usually packed, and I'll need to make reservations now if you want to go." Tara looked over at her sister with a nod of her head. "Okay, future plans." "Yeah, Ken, that sounds like fun," Tara responded. "Count me in," chimed in Laura. "Okay, I'll call and make the reservations. We'll see you guys for breakfast tomorrow morning around 8:30. That'll give us plenty of time before we need to be on the first tee." "Okay, Ken, we'll see you then." They said goodbye, and Tara reached over to disconnect the call. "That Ken's a nice guy, isn't he?" commented Laura. "Yeah, I'm really going to miss playing with those guys. But at the same time, I hope their friend will be able to make it next year. We were talking about him on the plane. They said he's getting stronger and they were pretty sure he'd be able to join them again this summer. But enough of that. You were about to tell me why you've been acting so weird lately." "I slept with his wife," mumbled Laura, her voice tinged with shame. What? What do you mean you slept with whose wife?" "With Ken's wife, Jennifer." "Hold on, this makes no sense at all. How could you sleep with his wife when just before I left Chicago, Bill and the kids were already in Atlanta, but I had to stay behind for a week while I finished training my replacement? The company put me up at Water Tower Place, remember?" Tara nodded, still struggling to grasp what her sister was saying. "Anyway, I was downstairs in one of the restaurants eating lunch one day when Jennifer came over to my table. She'd recognized me. I dated her brother in high school. I couldn't believe she remembered me. I remember Jerry having a sister but couldn't tell you what she looked like. I asked how Jerry was doing, and we started talking. I asked her to have a seat, and she told me how much she admired me back then, saying she thought I was the most beautiful girl she'd ever seen. Hell, imagine how flattered I was. I asked if she'd had lunch. When she said no, I told her I had an expense account and lunch was on me. After she ordered, we talked some more. Laura, that doesn't explain how you could. Tara, remember how mixed up I was in high school? For a while, I thought I was a lesbian, but I also liked boys, so I thought I could go either way. I really liked Jerry. He was tall and good-looking, with an easy way about him and a confidence you didn't find in most 18-year-olds. We did everything together for about 6 months, then someone told him I was a lesbian. He confronted me about it, and when I admitted to sleeping with a couple of girls at school, he got pissed and dumped me, saying he wasn't going to date a lesbo. It broke my heart at the time. You know, I think I remember that now, although I'm not sure I knew why he dumped you. But I do remember how crushed you were. Yeah, she said with a trace of lingering emotion, it made me drop boys altogether for a while. That didn't last long, though, and after dating a couple more guys, I decided I liked them better than girls. By the time I met Bill, I had no desire to ever be with another woman, and that's the way it's been until I ran into Jennifer. Laura took a sip of wine and paused for a moment, looking out into the darkness before continuing. She told me she was jealous of her brother the whole time we were dating. When Jerry told her why he dumped me, she admitted to developing this fantasy about us being together. She told me she would lie in bed and dream of us kissing. She didn't come right out and say it, but the way she talked, I know she imagined us together intimately. Of course, she had never actually been with a woman and really had no desire to, it was just me. Her fantasy was just about us. Tara couldn't remember the last time she was so angry with her sister. Laura, I can't tell you how disappointed I am. Not only did you take advantage of Ken's wife, but you also cheated on Bill. Did you forget how devastated I was when I caught Tony? Hell, Laura, you were the one who held my hand through it all. How could you? I know. I'm not proud of it, believe me. It was. I don't know. I started to remember what it was like to be with a woman, and something inside me just snapped. I don't know what came over me, but I got really turned on while listening to her talk. I hadn't had a thought like that since high school, but suddenly, all my emotions changed while she was talking to me. Laura was getting emotional, tears fell freely down her cheeks. I thought, just one more time, what the hell? The situation was perfect. My family was 700 miles away, and no one would ever know. Did you know she was married? Laura slowly nodded her head. Yeah, I saw her rings. But damn, Laura, I can't believe this. I know, managed Laura between sobs. Hold on, Tara said. She stood, opened the glass sliding door to their room, and reached in to grab her purse from the desk. Here, she said, handing Laura a tissue. Thanks, Laura wiped more tears from her face. So, who actually initiated this situation? You or her? I did. I think she was shocked by my proposal, at least at first. I told her I was only going to be in town until that Sunday and then I'd be gone, and she'd never see or hear from me again. I told her it was her one and only chance to actually realize her fantasy. She was terrified her husband would find out, but I told her that was impossible. All she had to do was come up with a good excuse, something he'd believe, like a sick friend or something like that. If she could come up with a convincing excuse, there was no way he'd ever find out. It'd be a one-time thing, no strings attached, no emotional ties. I'd be gone, and she would have lived out her fantasy. I could see she was actually considering it, so I asked for her phone number and told her to go home and think about it. I said I'd call her the next day. I knew I had her as soon as she gave me the number. Just then, both women were taken by surprise. At first, neither knew from where the angry voice came. Oh my God, screamed Tara as she abruptly remembered that her phone didn't always disconnect when she hit the button. Ken, is that you? She looked into the terrified face of her sister. Ken? You mean he heard us? He heard everything I said? I think so, Tara replied. Oh my God, Tara. What do I do? Laura cried. Unknown to anyone at Hilton Head, a little earlier in the day, Jen had confessed the entire story to Marge. She had become so emotional while explaining everything that Marge didn't want to leave her home alone. Going to the movies as they had planned was definitely out of the question, so Marge convinced her friend to come home with her after dinner. The kids migrated to the living room to watch TV, which gave Marge and Jen a chance to sit in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and talk. Jen was still pouring her heart out when Marge's cell rang. "Oh, it's Jack." "Hold on a minute, Jen," Marge said, connecting the call. "Hello, honey?" Marge's face quickly contorted from a big smile to an expression of shock as her husband spoke on the other end. "What? Why? Oh my God, no!" Seeing the stress in her friend's face, Jen was about to excuse herself to avoid overhearing a private conversation, but Marge motioned for her to stay. Marge listened to her husband with a worried look. "Well, couldn't you calm him down?" "How did he?" "Yes, I'm afraid it's true." "No, I didn't know anything about it until this morning." Suddenly, it was Jen who had the worried look on her face. "What? What happened?" she blurted out. Marge looked like she had just lost her best friend. She covered the phone for a second. "I'm afraid it's bad news, honey. Hold on while I find out as much as I can." She put the phone back to her ear and listened to her husband on the other end. "Oh no, I didn't just swear in front of the kids. They're in the living room. She's here." "Ah, well, she was worried that Ken was going to cheat on her this weekend because, no, I think it was her own guilt talking. Ever since she got back from that mysterious weekend, she's been a little paranoid. You guys going on this trip kind of brought it to a head. When I asked her why she was so jealous of Tara, she admitted everything. She was so upset I had her come home with me." Jen didn't need to hear Jack's details to know that the unthinkable had happened. Somehow, Ken knew. But that couldn't be right. How could he have found out? "Well, can't you stop him, talk to him, get him to?" She looked over at Jen and slowly shook her head. "All right, honey. Okay, if by any chance he comes back, please let me know, okay? I love you too, honey. Bye." Marge looked at her friend sitting across the table. Jen looked terrified, like her whole world had just ended. Tracks of tears were already staining her cheeks, but she still held onto a sliver of hope that somehow she had misinterpreted the one-sided conversation. After all, Ken was hundreds of miles away. How could he have possibly discovered her secret from there? Just as Jen was finishing that thought, her friend destroyed her last shred of optimism. "I guess you figured out what that was all about," Marge said in a soft, pitying voice. Jen broke down in tears. It was beyond comprehension. How could it be true? How? How did he find out? She cried. "I don't know, honey," Marge said. "Jack told me Ken burst into their room ranting about you cheating on him. He said he'd never seen Ken so mad before. He tried to calm him down and find out what was going on, but Ken was beyond talking. He threw his clothes in his bag, asked Jack to take care of his clubs, and took off. Where did he go? I'm not sure, but I would guess he's coming home. At least that's what Jack thinks." "Home?" "He's coming home tonight, I would imagine, if he can. His ticket was for tomorrow, so Jack didn't know if he'd be able to get a return flight tonight or not. With any luck, he'll have to go back to the hotel, and Jack will have a chance to talk to him before you two see each other." Jen was now visibly trembling. "This has to be a mistake," she sobbed. "How could he possibly know?" "Honey, I don't know, but I don't think it's a mistake. Jack told me Ken said he knew what you did on that weekend last year." No, she cried, shaking her head in disbelief. "What will I do, Marge? Should I go home?" "Honey, I wish I knew what to tell you. You don't think he'd physically hurt you, do you?" No, he wouldn't hurt me like that, no matter how angry he was. But I don't think I can face him. Jen, you're going to have to sooner or later. It might as well be sooner." With tears still dripping down her face, Jen just stared into space without saying a word. She was finding it hard to breathe, and her heart felt like it would burst. In her mind, she was already wondering how she would survive in a cold, dark world without Ken to love and protect her. "Jen, listen," Marge said gently. "If he does make it back tonight, maybe he'll at least cool off on the plane. Maybe he'll sit and listen to you. You can tell him what you told me. Tell him how sorry you are." The initial shock was starting to wear off. Jen was thinking more clearly. "I don't think he's going to listen to me, Marge. Not yet anyway. Even if he did, what would I say? Yes, I cheated on you, but it was only with a woman, not a man. What difference does it make? None, not as far as Ken is concerned. Absolutely none. The fact is, I asked for his trust. No, I demanded his trust, and then I broke it, Marge. I think I've lost him, the most important person in my life, and I've lost him." Tears once again welled up in Jen's eyes. Marge walked over and rubbed her friend's back, trying to soothe her emotions. "Honey, you don't know that. Ken's an intelligent, reasonable man, and he loves you dearly. Don't give up hope." Jen silently sat, looking like a forlorn, lost soul. "I'm going to call Mrs. Murphy from next door and see if she can babysit tonight," Marge said, reaching for the phone. A couple of minutes later, everything was set. Mrs. Murphy, a woman in her early 60s who lived alone and was usually available to babysit, was coming over and would spend the night if necessary. Neither Jen nor Marge spoke a word all the way back to the house. Jen stared out her window, feeling like she was being driven to her execution. Ken was indeed able to exchange his ticket and was already on his way back to O'Hare. He sat in an aisle seat, looking almost comatose as those around him went about their business, completely unaware of the tortured soul among them. He rested his elbow on the arm of his seat and lowered his forehead into his hand. There must have been over 100 people sitting nearby, yet he had never felt more alone. He was confused, hurt, angry, and humiliated. He felt inadequate, like a loser. He closed his eyes and drifted back in time, remembering the encounter he had with his wife that past spring. "Trust her," he said silently to himself. What a joke. She said she didn't sleep with another man. Stupid, stupid, stupid. It never occurred to me to ask if she slept with a woman. She knew damn well I'd never expect her to do something like that. Oh yes, she's so clever. Unconsciously, he took a ragged deep breath and let it out with a small sigh. How could she cheat on me like that? Cheat on us? Cheating is cheating, whether it's fantasy or reality, man or woman. She knew exactly what she was doing and did it anyway. A tear broke free and trickled down his cheek. He quickly wiped it away and glanced around to see if anyone noticed. It was the first time since overhearing Laura and Tara that he felt anything but anger and rage. Once he was aware of the pain and sadness, it quickly overwhelmed him. He began to feel nauseous, and his heart pounded. Suddenly, he sprang from his seat and hurried to find an empty lavatory. Ken was no stranger to emotional pain. His mother had died when he was just 15. But this was different. Not only had the woman he loved betrayed him, not only had she broken their wedding vows, but she had also mocked and undermined his trust. Had she ever truly loved him, or was their entire marriage just a facade? Ken splashed some water on his face and dried himself with a paper towel. Time had stood still, and he had no idea how long he had been in there. All he knew was that his marriage was most likely over. He loved Jennifer with all his heart, but love was a two-way street, and he couldn't see how she could love him and still do what she did. Jennifer and Marge were sitting in the kitchen when they heard him at the front door. Jen's face was a picture of terror, as if she were facing a firing squad. "Let me talk to him," volunteered Marge. "He'll listen to me." Jen slowly shook her head. "No, this is yes, I have to face him." Her face scrunched up, and tears streamed down her cheeks again. "Oh God, Marge, what am I going to do?" Marge ran to her, knelt down, and put her arms around her. "Please, honey, let me talk to him." "Maybe when?" Before she could finish, Jen looked up and saw Ken standing in the doorway. It was clear she knew he had found out about her affair. Jack, of course, she should have guessed he'd be involved. Most of Ken's anger had turned into pain, and he wasn't in the mood for a confrontation. No one said a word. They just looked at each other for what seemed like an eternity but was only a few seconds. Ken turned and sat in his favorite easy chair, staring down at the floor. There was so much he wanted to say, so many accusations he wanted to hurl at her, but now it all seemed so hopeless. What's the use, he told himself. It's over. He caught a glimpse of his soon-to-be ex-wife out of the corner of his eye. She was standing there, just watching. I'm so sorry, she finally said, almost in a whisper. I have no excuses. It was selfish, terribly selfish of me. Since then, not a day has gone by that I haven't regretted what I did. I've regretted it because I love you, Ken. I love you so much, and I knew how much you would be hurt if you ever found out. I am so very, very sorry. Ken scoffed. Yeah, sure you love me. So much that even though you knew how much it would hurt me, you went ahead and did it anyway. That's real love. And all that talk about Tara being my girlfriend? Nothing but a smokescreen. Very clever, Jen. Very clever. No, that's not it. Ken raised his hand. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear any more of your lies. Just leave. Leave me alone right now. I can't stand the sight of you. Jen's heart dropped. He hadn't said or done anything she hadn't really expected, but she had clung to the slightest thread of hope. The hope she saw in his face was misplaced. I'm sorry, Ken. I'm sorry for the pain I caused you. I never meant to hurt you. Marge, who had been listening from the kitchen, came over. I don't want to hurt you anymore. I have a bag packed. Marge offered to let me stay with her for a couple of days. Go, he said, raising his voice. Just go. Get out of my sight. It looked like Jen was about to collapse. Marge rushed to her side and grabbed her. Come on, honey. Let's give him some time. Ken heard them rustling around behind him as they grabbed Jen's suitcase from the hall closet and left through the front door. I love you, Jen said in a weakened voice as she was led out by her friend. Ken didn't move from his chair. He heard Marge start her car and drive away. He saw her headlights pass by the window. She was driving away with his life, with the future he thought he had with the woman he loved more than anything. This time, there was no need to control himself. He lowered his head into his hands and let the tears flow. The next morning, Marge was surprised when she heard Jack. She looked at the clock. It was only a little after 10:30. Jack, I wasn't expecting you until later tonight. Yeah, well, Laura's little story about her and Jen and Ken walking out kind of put a damper on things. I grabbed the first flight out this morning. He must have gotten a flight out last night because he never came back to the motel. Oh yeah, he got home about midnight. I was with Jen when he walked in. What happened? Well, about what you might expect. Ken told her to get out. He didn't want to even look at her. I brought her home with me. She's still upstairs sleeping. I hope you don't mind. What a mess. I don't really know about her staying with us, Marge. The last thing I want to do is get in the middle of this. Ken's been my best friend for a long time, and I don't want him thinking I'm taking Jen's side. Okay, let's just play it by ear and see how things go. Are you hungry? I just got up myself. Jen and I were up till 4 this morning talking. I was just about to make some breakfast. The kids were already out doing their own thing, Marge said as she and Jack had a chance to talk over bacon and eggs. Okay, tell me, how did Ken find out about Jen cheating on him? You're not going to believe it. Remember I told you Tara had a sister named Laura? Yeah. Well, she's the one Jen cheated with. No, but I thought she lived in Atlanta. She does now, but she lived in Chicago until last year. How's that for It's a Small World story? Ken told me that Tara and her sister came to his room the night before so Laura could apologize. But it was a bit too late. That's when he learned about his buddy overhearing their conversation. Tara came along to give her sister moral support. She needed it too. She was crying so hard I could hardly understand her. Sometimes, between sobs, she told me the whole story. She took full responsibility for the whole thing and said she talked Jen into it. Before they left, Laura asked if I thought Ken would contact her husband. I didn't know what to tell her. I kind of doubted, but I've never seen him that way. I told her she should go home and confess. It would be better for him to hear it from her than from Ken. You think she'll do it? I don't know. She has a lot to lose. The ones I feel sorry for are the kids. They have 3, and they're all cute as buttons. Jack sadly shook his head and took a sip of coffee. I'll tell you one thing, I don't think Jen has to worry about us playing golf with Tara anymore. She was so embarrassed she wouldn't even fly back on the same plane as me. She could have, but she kept the ticket she already had for later in the evening. Jack saw his wife looking up at the doorway behind him. He turned around and saw Jen standing there. How, Jack? How did Ken find out? Have a seat, Jen. Jack can explain everything while I make you something to eat, Marge told her. Worn out from lack of sleep and all the emotional trauma, Jen walked almost like a zombie to the table and sat down, her disbelief palpable as Jack proceeded to explain the circumstances regarding her husband's discovery. I'm sorry, Jack. I really messed things up for everyone, didn't I? I won't lie to you, Jen. This affects more than just you and Laura. Even Marge and I are being pulled into this. Hell, I feel like a fool for sticking up for you back then. I told Ken there was no way you'd ever cheat on him. Laura could lose her entire family, and in all the years I've known Ken, I've never seen him so upset and hurt. Jack, his wife admonished, throwing him a dirty look. Well, it's true, damn it, he replied angrily. Come on, honey, eat your eggs. Marge told her in a much more sympathetic voice than her husband's, they're getting cold. After eating, Jen went back to her room, where she spent most of the day and night alone. The next morning, Jack was surprised to see Ken's car as he pulled into work. He really thought Ken would take a couple of days off. Jack had no idea what to say to his friend. Should he apologize for convincing him Jen would never cheat? It was almost 11 by the time he got a few minutes to visit Ken. His office door had been closed all morning. He lightly knocked and then opened the door a crack, seeing his buddy staring out at the city. Can I come in? Jack asked. Ken responded without looking back. Sorry to stick you with my clubs the other day. I'll pay the extra cost. No problem. They're in my trunk. Don't let me forget to give them to you before we leave today. Jack nodded but stayed silent. I'm so sorry, my friend. I wish I had some words of wisdom or could somehow make things better, he said, letting his words hang in the air. Yeah, I know. Unfortunately, there's nothing you or anyone else can do. I appreciate the thought, though. Is she still at your place? Yeah. Is that a problem for you? Because if it is. No problem. Are you sure? Because I won't let her stay if you. Jack, it's okay. Really? Ken walked over and sat behind his desk. Jack sat on the opposite side in his usual chair. Damn, Jack, I don't know which is worse, the fact that she cheated or the way she did it. I remember that whole conversation like it happened yesterday. Anyone else would have made up some lie, but not her. No, she had to make a fool out of me. Do you trust me? She asked. Nothing like rubbing my nose in it. I really don't think that was what she was trying to do, Ken. I'm not sure just what she was thinking, but I really don't think she was deliberately rubbing your nose in it. From what Laura told me. Laura? When did you talk to her? She and Tara came down to our room right after you left. Laura wanted to try and apologize. They only missed you by 2 or 3 minutes. They both felt terrible. Tara had tears in her eyes, but Laura was outright bawling. Ken didn't say anything, he just turned his head and looked out the window again. Jack could see the hurt in his buddy's eyes. Any idea what you're going to do? Jack asked. File for divorce, I guess. What else can I do? She cheated. Yeah, I know she cheated. But look, don't do anything just yet. I mean, there's no hurry, right? Take some time and think it through. Maybe, I don't know, maybe go see a counselor or something. Don't just throw it all away. Man, don't make me out to be the bad guy. I'm not the one who cheated, Ken retorted. No, I'm not saying that. Look, you're my best friend. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. I just know you're hurting right now and probably want to strike out and hurt her back. All I'm saying is don't do something in anger that you'll regret later." Ken continued to stare out the window as he thought about what his friend had just said. After a few seconds, he promised Jack he wouldn't make any rash decisions. A week later, everything was still in a state of flux. Ken knew what he had to do. He even reached for the phone to call his lawyer a couple of times, but just couldn't bring himself to dial the number. Jack was just leaving the building to go on a local sales call when he ran into a familiar face. "Laura? What are you doing here?" "Hi, Jack. I came to see Ken," she told him sheepishly. "I can only imagine what he must think about me, but I have to apologize to him. I have to tell him how sorry I am." "How's he doing?" "How's he doing?" Jack replied, snidely. "Not good. He kicked Jen out of the house. She's staying with me and my wife for the time being." "Oh God, no. It wasn't her fault. I talked her into it. I have to tell him what happened." "Jack, do you think he'll see me?" "I doubt it. Besides, Jen's a big girl. She wouldn't have been there if she didn't want to be. At least, that's how Ken's going to see it. I think you're wasting your time, Laura. I really do. I have to try. Jack, this whole mess is all my fault. I've got to try." "Well, I can guarantee if you go in there and just say you want to see him, he'll have you kicked right out of the building. What can I do? I came all the way out here. I can't go back without at least trying." Jack thought for a moment. Damn, he hated getting any more involved in this whole thing than he was already, but he said, "Look, I'm on my way out to a sales meeting. I should be back about 2. There's a little place called Plato's Place on Devon, 1 street over and about 3 blocks to your right. Wait for me there. I'll stop in after my meeting and see if I can't pave the way for you to see Ken." "Oh Jack, thank you. You have no idea how much this means to me. I haven't been able to sleep since this whole thing blew up." It was almost 3 o'clock by the time Jack and Laura were back at the office. "Hi Betty," Jack greeted Ken's secretary in the outer office. "Is he busy?" "No more than usual," she replied with a smile, glancing at Laura. "And who is this?" "This is Laura, a friend of mine and Ken's." "Laura," Betty said, extending her hand. "Hi. Laura, why don't you have a seat out here while I go in and tell Ken you're here?" Jack suggested as he knocked on the door. Betty didn't know what was going on, but it wasn't hard to see Jack's guest was very nervous as she sat down in one of the waiting room chairs. Ken looked up from his paperwork as he heard the door open. "Hi Jack. How'd you make out with Jenkins?" "Okay. I got the contract renewed. Funny thing, though, I ran into someone on the way over there." "Oh? Who?" "Laura. She wants to talk to you, Ken. She's waiting outside." "Jack, what the hell? What did you bring her here for?" "I'm not talking to her. You should know better than that." "Damn it, Ken, she flew all the way out here just to talk to you." "I don't care if she flew under her own power," Ken joked derisively. "She probably just wants to see if I'm going to inform her husband." "Okay, I'll tell her it's no deal, but I don't think that's why she's here. She wants to tell you what happened. You've always said to make sure you have all the facts before signing a contract. Shouldn't the same apply when breaking a contract? You know, like a marriage contract?" "No, Jack, it was Jennifer who broke our marriage contract." Jack turned toward the door. "Okay, Ken, but I think you're making a mistake." "Wait a minute," Ken said. Jack's words hit home. Okay, send her in." "Yes, sir," Jack responded with a big smile. He walked back out and told Laura she could go in. "Thanks, Jack," she said, heading into the lion's den. The first thing Laura noticed was Ken's defensive posture. She was a businesswoman and knew a defensive posture when she saw one. She could tell Ken was loaded for bear. She was going to offer him a handshake but didn't think he'd take it. Instead, she stood a few feet away from his desk. "Thank you for seeing me, Ken. Considering what you must think of me, I really appreciate it." Ken just leaned back in his chair without saying a word. Laura was hoping he'd offer her a seat to make things a little less formal, but he didn't. She gave a small sigh and continued standing. I know there are no words in any language to express how sorry I am for what I did to you and Jen. I don't expect you to ever forgive me, but I hope you'll find it in your heart to forgive your wife. It wasn't her fault, Ken. When I first offered to make her fantasy a reality, she flat out said no. But I wasn't about to take no for an answer. I played on her vulnerability. I reminded her of how she felt when she first started thinking about us together. I told her it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. She was terrified that somehow you'd find out, but I convinced her that would never happen. I also convinced her it wasn't really cheating. I told her cheating is when a woman is unfaithful with another man. Laura could feel her legs growing wobbly from the tension and asked if she could sit down. Without saying a word, Ken pointed to one of the chairs opposite his desk. She sat down and pulled a handkerchief from her purse to wipe her eyes before continuing. Ken, I know you heard me talking to Tara. I probably made it sound like it was easy to seduce your wife, but I wasn't about to tell my sister how hard I actually had to work at it. That day at Water Tower Place, I talked until I was blue in the face. I thought for sure I had her convinced by the time she left, but the next day when I called, she said no. I talked for another hour until she finally gave in. Why the whole weekend? Why not just one night? Ken finally spoke. I talked her into that too. I thought since she'd never been with a woman before, I'd have to take it slow, get her comfortable, and show her how to make love to me. One night wouldn't have been enough. Laura, my wife isn't someone who can be persuaded to do something she doesn't want to do. I don't care how good a saleswoman you are. You're right, Ken. If it hadn't been for her fantasy, I wouldn't have been able to convince her at all. But I kept reminding her of how good she felt when she would lie in bed and think of us together. I told her she would always wonder what it would be like, that it would haunt her if she didn't take this one and only opportunity. Laura's tears were now streaming down her cheeks. I'm sorry, Ken. You're a great guy and you didn't deserve this. Neither did Jen. None of this would have happened if she hadn't seen me that day at the restaurant. Please don't punish her for one weak moment. Ken sat staring at the sobbing woman, showing no sign of feeling sorry for her. I'll think about it, he stated flatly. Laura nodded. I guess that's all I can ask. I never wanted to hurt her or you. I'm so sorry, she said, standing up. I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive her. Ken, she's a good person and she loves you dearly. She made a mistake. We all do now and then. She didn't go out looking for an affair or succumb to some guy, she fell into my trap. Please give her another chance. Laura was grateful for the opportunity to say what she needed to and turned to head for the door. Aren't you going to ask if I'll look up your husband and tell him what happened? Ken called out. She turned around to face him. Somehow, Ken, you just don't strike me as the kind of guy to do that. If I was a man, yes. If I was a man, I'm sure they'd be taking me out of here on a stretcher about now. But I don't see you as trying to destroy my family to get back at me. Even if you were, it would be too late. I told my husband everything as soon as I got back. You did? Ken said, a little shocked. And what happened? Well, I can't say he was pleased, that's for sure. Like you, he was extremely hurt and is having a hard time dealing with it. But he's trying. With those parting words, Laura left for home, where she was resigned to do whatever it took to save her own marriage. Nothing really changed over the next couple of days, except that Laura had given Ken even more to think about. At Jack's house, things were still strained. Jennifer was still getting cold vibes from her husband's best friend, so she stayed in her room most of the time. Just a few days after Laura's visit, Jack was on his way to the kitchen for breakfast when he heard a terrible noise from the downstairs washroom. He walked over and stood with his ear close to the door. It sounded like someone vomiting. He gently knocked. Who's in there? Are you all right? He asked. Leave her alone, Jack, Marge said as she appeared beside him. Is that Jennifer? Is she sick? Yeah, she woke up sick to her stomach. It's probably from all the stress. Come on, breakfast is on the table. Jack didn't think too much of it until the next day when he heard her again. As he sat down at the breakfast table, he asked Marge if she was still sick. "If she's not better by tomorrow," he said, "she should go to the doctor. I hope it's not contagious. The last thing we need is a house full of sick people." Marge agreed. It was 2 days later when the subject came up again. The kids had already left for school, and Jack was having eggs and bacon with his wife. "Did Jen go to the doctor?" he asked. "She has an appointment for next week." "Next week?" "She's been throwing up for days. Now she can't get an appointment any sooner than that?" When Marge didn't answer, Jack immediately knew something was wrong. "What's going on? Is it something serious?" She doesn't want me to tell you," Marge said, holding her head down. "Tell me what, Marge? You know better than that. There are no secrets in this house. Now, what the hell is going on?" He was starting to get angry. Marge reached over and laid her hand over his in a calming gesture. "She's pregnant." "Pregnant? Pregnant?" Jack's mind raced. "Holy, is it Ken's?" It was Marge who was angry now. "Of course it's Ken's. How can you even ask something like that?" she scolded. "Hey, she cheated on him with a woman. Who's to say she didn't do the same with another guy?" Jack argued. "I'm surprised at you." "What? Don't give me that. When someone shows they're not trustworthy, it opens all kinds of suspicions. You lie about one thing, and suddenly everything you've ever said is called into question." "I'm sorry, but that's how it is," Jack said with a sigh. Marge groaned. "It makes sense, though I don't want to admit it. Jack, I can't believe you honestly think Jen would go out and sleep with another man." Not really," Jack said. "But actions have consequences, and when people lose their faith in someone, it's damn hard for that person to ever regain their trust again." "I know," Marge admitted with a sigh. "Are you positive she's pregnant?" Marge nodded. "Jack, I have 3 kids. I think I can recognize morning sickness when I see it. I made her take a home pregnancy test yesterday, and it was positive. The doctor's visit next week is just to confirm it, but there's no doubt in my mind. You can't tell Ken, though." "Not yet." "What do you mean, don't tell Ken?" "He has a right to know his wife is pregnant with his child." "I agree," Marge said, "but right now, she's scared to death." "You remember what happened before?" "Of course I remember." "What did she do, stop using her birth control?" "No, she has a diaphragm, but it must have slipped." "What difference does it make?" "It happened." "I don't get it. Why doesn't she want to tell Ken?" "I doubt very much that he'd divorce her now." "That's just it," Marge said. "She doesn't want him to think she's trying to blackmail him into taking her back. If they stay together, she wants to make sure it's because he still loves her, not just because he feels it's his obligation." "Well, I must say, that's admirable on her part, but it doesn't make sense. Of course, he's going to feel it's his obligation. Do you think for 1 minute Ken would walk away from his kid? Even if he files for divorce, it wouldn't be final for 6 months. She's obviously going to be showing by then. She can't keep something like that a secret for long, and he could stop the divorce anytime." Marge thought about what he said. "You're right. I guess she's just not thinking logically right now. Well, I'm not about to keep a secret like this from Ken and piss him off any more than I already have. Besides, as angry and hurt as he is, he still loves her. She's going to need him. I think all he needs is an excuse to take her back, and this certainly qualifies." That day, things were kind of hectic in the office for both Jack and Ken. As it got toward the end of the day, Jack asked his buddy to join him for a drink. Ken thought it was a great idea. It had been a hard day, and it would be good to unwind. He had no idea Jack had anything specific on his mind until Jack suggested they sit at a table instead of the bar. They placed their order before Jack started to talk. "I have to ask you, my friend. Have you come to any conclusions about what you're going to do yet?" Ken looked up and saw the waitress returning with their beers. He indicated he would wait until she was gone before responding. The truth was, he hadn't decided anything yet. Although he didn't see how he could ever trust her again, he was still anguishing over divorcing her. Even after she'd hurt him so badly, he couldn't simply stop loving her. A sip of beer gave him a small reprieve before answering his friend's question. No, I really haven't. The other day, Laura tried to take full responsibility for everything, but she didn't put a gun to Jen's head. The fact is, Jen knew exactly what she was doing when she left for her little affair that weekend. What still bothers me, I think even more than the act itself, is the way she did it. All that talk about trusting her, you say she wasn't trying to rub my nose in it, but I don't see any other way of looking at it. Well, you know me, Jack said. I've never been one to just give up on anything, let alone my marriage. I don't know, maybe it counts in. He took another sip of his beer. Why is she becoming a problem? Jack asked. Ken was still wrestling with the information he had. He wanted what was best for his buddy, but wasn't sure what that was. He knew Ken still loved her, but was taking Jennifer back really in his best interest? Still, he had to take his own advice. She'd be showing, and if Ken knew he tried to hide it from him, there'd be hell to pay. No problem, not really. But, well, yes, I guess there's a problem. Jack fiddled with the beer bottle on the table. Well, come on, Jack, out with it. She's pregnant. At first, Ken wasn't sure he heard correctly. After her miscarriage, his wife had refused to even talk about trying again. The death of their unborn child had been devastating for both of them. He had given up hope of ever becoming a father. Did you say Jen was pregnant? He asked, not believing his own ears. Jack nodded. Yep. She's been vomiting in the mornings. I thought it was morning sickness and had her take a home pregnancy test. It showed positive. She has a doctor's appointment next week to make sure, but Marge says there's no doubt. Jack watched as his friend sat, staring down at the floor and not saying a word, almost as if he was in shock. She didn't want us to tell you, he continued. Marge says she's absolutely terrified, but even so, she didn't want to get you back only because you felt you had to. She wants you back because you love her. Damn, I love her. She'd have the divorce papers in her hand already if I didn't, Ken said, his voice heavy with emotion. Jack had no idea what was going through his buddy's mind, but it was obvious he was struggling with the new information. I've got to think about this, Ken told Jack. In the meantime, don't say anything to Jennifer. As far as she knows, I'm still in the dark. Okay, yeah, sure. I won't say a word. Jack had somehow expected his friend to say he would take her back immediately after hearing the news, and was shocked by Ken's reaction. He had to ask the question. Are you still thinking about divorcing her? I don't know, Jack. I just don't know. I still keep going back to that conversation we had, all that do you trust me, crap. I need some time to think. Her being pregnant puts a new wrinkle in things. Ken took a big swallow from his bottle. Are you ready? He asked. They both left the bar and went home. Marge wanted to ask what happened as soon as Jack walked in the door, but Jen was helping her with dinner. It wasn't until later that night, after putting the kids to bed and after Jen had retired for the night, that Marge got a chance to quiz her husband. So, did you tell Ken? Yeah, I told him, Jack replied a little hesitantly. And what did he say? Is he going to have her move back? Well, he didn't react the way I thought he would. He did mention counseling, but he also said he still had some more thinking to do. He's seriously considering divorce. I never thought it would go that far, but that's the way it sounded to me. He's got it in his head that she was rubbing his nose in it when she asked him to trust her. To him, it was the supreme act of disloyalty and disrespect. He just can't get past that. For the first time since the whole mess started, both Marge and Jack had to seriously consider their friends might be getting divorced. My God, Jack, what'll she do if he really divorces her? It'll destroy her. I know, honey, but it's not our call. We'll do everything we can for her within reason, but I'm not turning against Ken if it comes down to taking sides. You know where I stand. I know, she said sadly. I just never thought it would come to this. 3 days after Jack and Ken had their talk, Jen's phone rang. When she saw who it was, she started to tremble with fear. It seemed she had waited forever for him to call, but now she was terrified to answer. Her hand shook and her voice was weak. Hello? Hi, Jen. How are you doing?" His voice sounded cold, which added to her anxiety. "Okay. How about you?" "I'm doing okay, Jen. We have to talk. I still have a lot of unanswered questions. I've been thinking of the best way to go about it, and I think it would be better if you and I had the help of a professional. A counselor, marriage counselor, I guess." This was the best news Jen had heard in weeks. She wasn't sure what unanswered questions he was referring to, but any chance to beg for his forgiveness was welcome. She would get down on her hands and knees and kiss his feet if that's what it took. She quickly agreed to meet him anytime, anywhere. "Okay, let me check around and see if I can find a good counselor. I'll call and let you know when I do." "Ken," she hurried to speak before he had a chance to hang up. "Yes, I'm so sorry for all this. I love you so much." "Aha," was all he said before hanging up. Ken had a lot of issues. Trust was probably the biggest. Would he ever be able to trust her again? He had a plan that he hoped would answer that very question. Maybe it wouldn't restore his faith in her completely, but it would help, unless, of course, she chose to deceive him again. In that case, it would be the end. Soon after their conversation, Jen's phone rang again. She looked at the caller ID but didn't recognize the number. "Hello," she answered hesitantly. "Hello, is this Jennifer Ryan?" "Yes, I'm Jennifer Ryan." "Who is this?" "Miss Ryan, my name is Linda Wilson. I'm calling from Dr. Holstrom's office. Your husband has retained us for a series of counseling sessions with you and him. Would you have a moment to set your first appointment?" Yes, she replied with excitement. Anytime at all. The sooner, the better." Linda explained that before their first joint session, the doctor wanted to see each of them alone for an hour. They would each be given the opportunity to tell their side of the story openly and freely, without any reprisal or hurt feelings from their spouse. Ken had already made his appointment for the following afternoon. Jen agreed to the only time slot left, which was that morning. After listening to them, the doctor could see Jen's naive take on the situation. She believed the entire problem centered around her encounter with another woman, but after hearing Ken, he knew there were many more issues at hand. Ken was a little surprised at Jen's appearance when she walked in for their first joint session. He could tell she wanted to look good for him, but despite the makeup, she looked thin and a little gaunt. Dark circles under her eyes and a pale complexion betrayed the toll of the last few weeks. She gave him an uncertain smile and greeted him in a frail voice. Even under the care of their best friends, it was clear that the past few weeks had been very hard on her. With the preliminaries out of the way and both of them seated, the doctor started the session. "Mr. Ryan, after talking to each of you separately, I realized that Mrs. Ryan is really not aware of the total scope of your grievances. Therefore, we're going to start with you. I want you to tell her what you told me the other day." "All right," Ken answered. He started to speak but instead looked down at the floor. "I can almost come to terms with what you did. Laura came to my office a few days ago and told me how hard she worked to convince you, almost pressuring you into your affair. What makes it so unforgivable is the egotistical way you felt you had to rub my nose in it. The complete disrespect and contempt you showed me." Jen almost screamed, "No, never. Honey, I never." "Please, Mrs. Ryan," the doctor interjected. "Let him finish." Ken lifted his eyes to the doctor. "Do you remember what you asked the first time we talked about it? Do you trust me? You knew damn well you were hurting me. If you had come up with some plausible story about why you had to be gone for the weekend, I might have accepted it. At least you would have been trying to spare me the hurt. But no, you gave me all that crap about trust. You played me for a fool, and I fell for it." By now, Jen was wiping her eyes with a tissue, trying to keep up with her tears. Ken had stopped talking, and as hard as it was to speak through her sobs, Jen couldn't let him go on thinking what he was. She had to set the record straight. No, Ken, you have it all wrong. It's just the opposite." The doctor was about to cut her off again, but Ken gave him a nod to let her resume. "Ken, there is no excuse for what I did. It was a despicably selfish act. It was the worst thing I've ever done in my life, and I did it to the most important man in my life. I knew what I was doing was terribly wrong. Nonetheless, I wanted it so badly I couldn't help myself. But our discussion had nothing to do with not respecting you or rubbing your nose in my deceit. I love and respect you more than any man I've ever known. When I saw Laura sitting in the restaurant that day, I couldn't believe it. I was hit with a flood of memories. I remembered how much I liked and admired her when she was dating Jerry, and I remembered the shame I felt when I fantasized about her and me together. She wiped away more tears before continuing. You know my dad doesn't like homosexuals. My brother isn't much better. I might be more liberal in my thinking, but that doesn't mean I don't know how some of the people I love would see me if they knew I fantasized about a lesbian act. Jen, that has nothing to do with. Please, Ken, hear me out. Let me explain. I was ashamed and humiliated when I was younger, but I still couldn't help myself. That day, when I saw Laura at the restaurant, she said it was a one-time thing and I'd never have the chance again. She even used the word fate. At the time, I thought it was fate that put us back together. I wanted it so badly I could taste it. Realizing how her words might sound, Jen looked down in embarrassment. I didn't mean that the way it sounded. Go on, the doctor told her without cracking a smile at the unintended pun. Well, despite how I knew my family would feel and how you would feel if you ever found out, I just had to do it. I'd never have the chance again, and of course, no one would ever find out, including you. How could you, Mrs. Ryan started to say, but Dr. Holstrom interrupted. Why did you ask for your husband's trust and break it? Can you see how he would feel you were rubbing his nose in your deception? Yes, I see that now. But at the time, I didn't think about it like that. I didn't do it to rub your nose in it, not at all. Just the opposite. I did it that way because I couldn't lie to you. I'll admit, at first, I thought about it, but I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it for 2 reasons. 1, I truly have way too much respect for you to try and fool you with a lie. And 2, I'm a terrible liar. I couldn't take the chance of tripping up on my own lie somewhere down the line. If you knew I lied to you, you wouldn't rest until you knew the truth. I know you, she began, her voice trembling. If I had just asked you to trust me without explaining, there was no way I would have been exposed for lying. I knew you'd be suspicious and perhaps a bit hurt, but not nearly as much as you would be if you knew what I had done. No, I thought about it and decided that telling you I had to go without further questions was the safest way. At least, that's what I thought. Jen's throat was dry. Dr. Ram got her a drink of water, and she continued, It wasn't until I came home and saw the smashed lamp that I realized how much I'd hurt you. I wanted so much to make it up to you, but you wouldn't let me. How do you take away someone's pain, especially when you were the cause of it in the first place? Ken's voice was filled with anguish, startling Jen. I don't know, she wept. I didn't realize what you were going through. I thought you'd be curious and a little upset. I'm sorry, Ken. I'm just so sorry. Okay, the doctor interjected. Emotions are running high. Let's take a break and try to calm down a bit. Mr. Ryan, I want you to analyze what Mrs. Ryan said. Does it make sense to you? If not, why? Do you have more questions? Ken had listened to her every word. Knowing his wife as he did, it actually did make sense to him. If it was true, she wasn't trying to make a fool out of him, but he still had trust issues. Those he would deal with later. For now, he sat back and took everything in. Please believe me, honey, she said, looking at him. I was trying to minimize your hurt as much as possible, and I was sure I could make it up to you as soon as I got home. Of course, that didn't work out like I thought it would. The doctor stopped her there and turned to Ken, asking him to explain the pain he felt that weekend. As he spoke about all the torturous emotions he had gone through, Jen cried harder and kept apologizing. When it was her turn to talk again, both Ken and Dr. Holstrom could see and hear the sincerity in her voice. There was nothing phony about her remorse. The doctor was skilled in his profession, keeping them on track and giving both ample time to express themselves. Ken waited until the session was nearly over before bringing up his concern. Jen, I understand your motives better now, but even if we got back together, there's one thing that would still be missing from our lives: kids. I know how devastated you were when our baby died. I was, too. Even though the doctor said there was no reason to believe it would happen again, you won't even discuss trying again. Jen, I want children. If we stayed together, I want to try again. Her reaction to his statement would determine their future. The way he figured it, she had become pregnant the last time they were intimate, which was not quite 5 weeks ago. A first baby is rarely on time. Would she think she could adjust the timeline at the end of her pregnancy? Would she try to deceive him and agree to get pregnant, then get him into bed as quickly as possible? Or would she be honest with him? She had no idea how important her next statement would be. She was twisting a crumpled tissue between her fingers. If she told him, she would always wonder if he took her back out of love or duty. Well, she thought, I guess I'll never know for sure. Ken, I have something to tell you, she began, her voice wavering. I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to use it as a way of getting us back together, but I'm already pregnant. Oh, Ken, she cried, I'm so scared. If I lose this one, I don't think I can take it. I can't face losing another baby. For the last hour, Ken had been sitting with his heart in his throat. To take her back, he had to be able to trust her again. Her confession was certainly a step in the right direction. Ken rose from his chair, walked over, and put his arms around his sobbing wife. He wasn't 100% sure what he was going to do yet, but he wasn't heartless either. He tried to calm her by gently rubbing her shoulder and speaking in a soft voice. Take it easy, Jen. There's no reason to believe this baby won't be born strong and healthy. That's true, Mrs. Ryan interjected the doctor. Many women have miscarriages during their first pregnancy and then go on to have more with no problem. I know, she said, still sobbing, but I'm scared. I'm just so scared. The doctor got her another cup of water while Ken continued to comfort her. The allotted time for the session had already gone over, but both Ken and Jen were doing so well that Dr. Holstrom didn't want to stop them now. However, it was time to end the session. He confirmed the date and time of their next meeting and they left his office together. As much as Ken wanted to bring her home with him, he still had a couple of unresolved issues and wanted to go over the things said in the doctor's office. Jen was still trying to regain control of herself as she walked toward her car when Ken told her he wasn't going to let her drive in her condition. He insisted on taking her to Jack and Marge's place. He walked her inside, made sure she was okay, and then asked Jack to ride back with him to retrieve her car. It had been a tiring and emotional day, and Ken was exhausted by the time his head hit the pillow. Over the course of the next week, Ken could think of nothing but the events that had transpired between him and his wife, and the issues that led them to this point. One of his main concerns was the way Jen had deceived him so brazenly with her question about trust. It was out of character for her, and for a while, he wondered if he even knew his wife at all. The motive she gave during the counseling session seemed more in line with her way of thinking. He could imagine her thinking, what if I mess up down the road and he discovers I lied to him? She might have believed that asking him to trust her was the safest course of action. Of course, there was the issue of the affair itself. It didn't matter to him whether she was with a man or a woman, it was still betrayal. Jen had tried to take full responsibility, but that didn't absolve her of guilt. He considered her longtime fantasy and the circumstances, but it still boiled down to a choice, forgive or not forgive. He stayed up half the night mentally replaying everything that had happened. Sometime around 3 a.m, he made his decision. Spring was beginning to push winter away in Chicago. For the first time since December, the temperature reached the mid-40s, and pools of melted snow made walking a straight line nearly impossible. Ken was already seated in the counselor's office when his wife arrived. She looked nervous and scared as she sat down. How are you, Mrs. Ryan? Dr. Holstrom asked. Okay, I guess, Jen replied. I had a doctor's appointment yesterday, and he confirmed my pregnancy. I'm still scared. That's understandable, Mrs. Ryan, the doctor said. Ken let a term of endearment slip out for the first time since returning from Hilton Head. Please try not to worry. This baby is going to be strong and healthy. He's going to excel in everything he tries, and he's going to marry someone wonderful, just like his old man did, and give us lots of grandchildren. Jen almost missed his comment about the most wonderful woman in the world. How do you know it's going to be a boy? Did you say the most wonderful woman in the world? She asked, her face lighting up with hope. Ken sat back with a small grin. What if I did? Jen's eyes sparkled with hope. Oh, Ken, please don't play games with me. Does that mean you forgive me? Jen, I can't tell you how much it hurt when I learned about what you did. I was filled with anger, and the pain of knowing you chose someone else over me was unbearable. I kept wondering if I would have done the same in your position, and the answer was always a resounding no. Ken rose from his chair and poured himself a cup of water. But I also had to take into account the 8 years of happiness we've shared. Those years warrant your forgiveness. Yes, they do. Before he could say another word, Jen jumped from her chair and threw herself into his arms. Oh, Ken, I love you so much, she cried, embracing him tightly. I love you too, he replied, but this is a one-time get-out-of-jail-free card. You understand that, right? Yes, my darling, she said, nodding quickly. I promise to be the best wife and mother you could ever want. After giving birth to a healthy baby boy, Jennifer kept her promise. 2 years later, little Kyle Ryan had a baby sister, Monique. Kyle grew up strong in both mind and body and even took the prettiest girl in town to the senior prom. At least he thought she was the prettiest. 5 years later, he married her. Monique grew up to be a fine young woman, even if she was a bit headstrong and occasionally gave her father fits. She was always the apple of his eye. Jennifer and Ken Ryan continued to live happily as a married couple. Now retired, they love doting on their 5 grandchildren. Ken still plays golf almost every Sunday with Jack, Smitty, and Ari. Bernie had recovered from his bout with cancer and was back on the course with his friends. They all saw Tara at the course from time to time. She still filled in occasionally. As for Laura and Bill, well, that's a whole story in itself. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.